the 12th, 1963. Today, London waits to welcome the President of India, Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, who is paying the first Commonwealth state visit ever made to Britain, and incidentally, returning that paid to India by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and the Duke of Edinburgh in 1961. At Victoria Station, the Queen, the Duke, members of the royal family, the Prime Minister and other distinguished personalities were there to receive the President, who is no stranger to Britain, but comes as an old friend, familiar with this country and its people. Princess Margaret and Princess Marina were there to welcome him. The Princess Royal had accompanied Dr. Radhakrishnan from Gatwick Airport. Sir Paul Gore Booth, the British High Commissioner in India, was also there to greet him. Welcoming crowds wait in the street outside. But first, a quick word of greeting from the President of India to some of his own people. The traditional sovereign's escort of the household cavalry accompany the open carriage, where the Queen sits next to her distinguished guest. Prominent among the enthusiastic crowds were many of the several thousands of Indians who live and work in London and who turned out to do honor to their president. The processional route leads up the Mall to Buckingham Palace, where the president stayed for the first 2 days of his visit. Inner courtyard of the Queen's London home, a guard of honor of the 1st Battalion, the Grenadier Guards, waited to salute their sovereign's guest. Next day, at the new Commonwealth Institute building in West London, the Queen and the President arrived to open the 5th biennial exhibition of Canadian painting. They were greeted by the Secretary of State for Commonwealth Relations, Mr. Duncan Sands, and Sir Edward Boyle, Minister of Education. Canadians from the Guard of Fort Henry, Kingston, Ontario, dressed in 19th century uniforms, provided the guard of honor. Inside the Institute, the President saw the permanent exhibition showing the countries of the Commonwealth and paused at the section devoted to Indian life and culture. In reply to the Queen's speech of welcome, the President said,
"May I say here that the transfer of power to India is one of the greatest acts of reconciliation in human history."
He went on to speak of the exhibition of art.
More important than the political arrangements and economic alliances is the understanding between peoples. That kind of understanding is brought about by a knowledge of other people's culture, their art forms. That's the way in which we get to the heart of another country. If we wish to know the soul of a country, it is reflected in its literature, in its art.
In the afternoon, a reception was held in the President's honor at the Royal Commonwealth Society. The hosts were the East India Association, the Royal India, Pakistan and Ceylon Society, and joint Commonwealth societies. After addressing the company, the President talked informally with those present. The days of the formal visit over, Dr. Radhakrishnan travelled north from London to Edinburgh, capital of Scotland. Its castle towers high over Princess Street, main thoroughfare of what has been called Britain's most beautiful city. The President drove to the Palace of Holyrood House, the historic mansion which was for centuries the seat of the Scottish kings, and is still the official residence of Queen Elizabeth when she visits her Kingdom of Scotland. Troops of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders formed a guard of honour, as the President was welcomed by the hereditary keeper of the palace, the Duke of Hamilton. At the McEwen Hall, the President was received by the Principal and Vice-Chancellor of the University of Edinburgh. Dr. Radhakrishnan is a philosopher of world repute, and appropriately the 400-year-old university conferred on their distinguished guest the honorary degree of Doctor of Civil Law. In his address, the President spoke of the ties between Edinburgh University and the universities in Bombay and in Madras, where he was once himself a student. No visitor to Scotland would want to miss the great bridges across the River Forth. The famous rail bridge, 8,290 feet long, was completed in 1890, and the new road bridge, now nearing completion, will provide a new highway from Edinburgh to the north. When finished, it will have the fourth longest span in the world. On his tour of the Scottish Highlands, the President stopped for lunch at Gleneagles Hotel and enjoyed a short stroll in the garden. At Cluny, beauty marches side by side with progress. This is the site of the great Tumulgarry hydroelectric scheme, one of 50 power stations which supply electricity to Scotland's cities and industries. The President planted a tree to commemorate his visit. Back once again in England, the President visited the Nuffield Radio Astronomy Laboratories at Jodrell Bank. There to greet him was the director, the famous astronomer Sir Bernard Lovell. Here is situated one of the world's largest radio telescopes, a giant bowl 250 feet in diameter, whose sensitive ear penetrates outer space far beyond the reach of the world's most powerful optical instruments. After looking at the control room, Sir Bernard took his guest outside for a closer look at the radio telescope. At Berkeley, in the west of England, the President visited the nuclear power station, one of the growing number that are daily feeding electricity into Britain's grid system. Britain pioneered the peaceful uses of atomic energy. The world's first full-scale nuclear power station at Calder Hall was opened in 1956. At Berkeley, the President must have found much to interest him and to remind him of India's own nuclear research station at Trombay. In the ancient university city of Oxford, Dr. Radhakrishnan was on familiar ground. The first Indian ever to hold a chair at Oxford, he was Spalding Professor of Eastern Religions and Ethics. He was also a Fellow of All Souls College, one of Britain's highest academic attainments. His former colleagues were delighted to welcome so distinguished a member in his own college. While in Oxford, the President saw an exhibition of books produced for the British government's low-price book scheme for overseas readers. The President had himself written the foreword to 3 of the books displayed. Both the President and India's Prime Minister, Mr. Nehru, take a strong personal interest in the plan to provide cheap textbooks for university students. Coventry, a city famous for the manufacture of cars and agricultural machinery, was heavily damaged in the last war. From the wreck arose a splendid new city centre, dominated by the magnificent modern cathedral, standing beside the ruins of its medieval predecessor. For the children and people of Coventry, the President's warmth and informality made this a memorable day. Stratford-upon-Avon is inevitably associated with William Shakespeare, Britain's greatest poet and dramatist, born there 400 years ago next year. The President came to the Royal Shakespeare Theatre with Mr. Duncan Sands. After a performance of Julius Caesar, some of the leading actors were introduced to the President. Also present was Dame Peggy Ashcroft, a leading player at the theatre and one of Britain's most distinguished actresses. Next day at Lancaster House, the British government gave a dinner in the President's honour, and this picture was taken of the Prime Minister and Lady Dorothy Macmillan receiving their guest. By tradition, the City of London likes to honour distinguished visitors to Britain by entertaining them and presenting them with an address. The President made his way to the Guildhall in the ancient style by launch along London's Royal River. Alighting at the historic Tower Pier, he finished the journey by car. The Guildhall is the council hall of the Corporation of the City of London and a monument to 5 centuries of city history. Waiting to receive the President were the Duke of Edinburgh, the Lord Mayor of London, and the Lady Mayoress. After the Lord Mayor had presented his address, the President replied,
"The world is intended to be our home. Everyone is our kindred. It is a family that we have to establish on earth. That is the thing that is now open to us. The Commonwealth has brought together a number of races, number of nations. They all work together as members who acknowledge certain ideals."
At a special reception for Indian students given at their own High Commission, the President was able to meet many of them and to talk to them about their work, their progress and their ambitions. There are more than 4,000 Indian students in Britain today, spread throughout her colleges, universities, hospitals and technical training establishments. Ascot Week is the highlight of Britain's racing calendar, an occasion when the fashionable world gathers at this lovely racecourse some 25 miles from London. It's a meeting that Queen Elizabeth never misses, and this year she went with President Radhakrishnan. She is herself a keen judge of horses as well as a leading owner, and usually has several horses running at Ascot. The 11-day visit was over, and the time had come for the President to return to his own country. At London Airport, Mr. Duncan Sands was there to say goodbye. President Radhakrishnan carries with him the goodwill and admiration of the British people, who will long remember the dignity and kindliness of this great scholar and statesman. And the President will remember, too, the warmth of the welcome given him by the people of Britain, who greeted him both as an old friend and as head of one of the great countries of the Commonwealth.